Alina Vasquez looked at him and smiled. "Nice ship," she said. "A bit cold, though. Do you have anywhere we can sit and talk?" They were taken to a conference room where a holographic image of High Chancellor Morvith waited. The crystalline leader glowed with impatience. "You wished to discuss conditions," Morvith said. "Speak quickly. We have a war to fight." Alina sat down and folded her hands on the table. "First, thank you for meeting with us. I know you expected us to just roll over and do what we were told. That's not really how we work. You have no choice," Morvith replied. "Our fleet can destroy your civilization in hours." "Probably," Alina agreed. "But here's the thing. In the 4 hours since your commander made his announcement, my people did some research. We intercepted your communications. We analyzed your technology. We found some interesting things." She slid a small device across the table. It projected a series of numbers and diagrams. "This is the frequency modulation pattern for your shields," she said. "We figured out how to disrupt it. That flagship you're so proud of? We can crack it open whenever we want. We chose not to because we'd rather talk." The room went silent. Gorvin checked his own instruments. The human was telling the truth. Somehow, in just 4 hours, these primitives had decoded technology that his own engineers had spent decades developing. "You're bluffing," Morvith said. But his glow had dimmed. "I'm not." Elena's smile never wavered. "Here's what I think happened. You came here expecting to find helpless primitives. You found something else. And now you're trying to figure out what to do about it." She leaned forward. "So let me make this simple. Yes, we'll give you soldiers. Humanity has been fighting war since before your council existed. We're good at it. Maybe the best. But our soldiers serve under human command. They follow human rules of engagement. They are not slaves, and they are not cannon fodder. And in return," Morvith asked, "when this war is over, humanity gets a permanent seat on your council. Full voting rights. Equal status with every other species. We're not joining your civilization as servants. We're joining as partners." Morvith's crystalline form pulsed with anger. "You are in no position to— I'm in exactly the position I need to be," Alina interrupted. "You need soldiers. We have soldiers. You need people who can adapt, improvise, and win battles against an enemy that's beating you. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." She stood up. "You have a choice, Chancellor. You can try to conquer us, and we'll make it so expensive that the Dracoth will finish you off while you're still trying. Or you can accept our help on our terms, and together we can win this war." She walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. "Take your time deciding. We've waited 10,000 years to meet our galactic neighbors. We can wait a little longer." She left the room. Her delegation followed. Gorvin looked at the holographic image of Morvith. "What do we do?" The Chancellor was silent for a long time. His glow shifted through colors that Gorvin had never seen before. "Accept their terms," Morvith finally said. "For now, and later. Later, we will remind them of their place." But as Gorvin transmitted the acceptance to the human shuttle, he felt something strange. It was a feeling he had not experienced in many years of combat. It was uncertainty, and somewhere in the depths of the ship, hidden from sensors and security systems, a small human device continued to record everything. The humans were already 3 steps ahead. They always would be. The breath, Dominion had been conquering worlds for 300 years. Their generals were brilliant. Their soldiers were fearless. Their strategies were perfect. They had turned warfare into mathematics, and they always knew the answer before the battle began. They calculated everything. They knew how many soldiers they needed for each victory. They knew how many would die on each side. They knew exactly how long each battle would take. War, to them, was not chaos. It was science. Then they met the humans. The first major battle with human forces took place at Theta Requiem, a mining colony that produced rare metals needed for ship construction. The Dracoth sent 2 million warriors. They had air superiority. They had orbital support. They had complete control of every strategic position. General Marcus Chen commanded the defense. He had 50,000 human soldiers and 200,000 council troops. By every calculation, should have been crushed in 2 days. The battle lasted 3 weeks. Chen did not fight the way the Drakath expected. He did not form defensive lines. He did not try to hold territory. Instead, he fought a dozen different battles at the same time. His forces melted into the terrain like ghosts. They appeared, struck hard, and vanished before the Drakath could respond. Human soldiers attacked supply lines while the main army waited for enemies that never came. They captured Drakath weapons and turned them against their makers within hours. They set traps that seemed random, but worked with devastating effect. Every time the Drakath thought they understood the pattern changed. Council observers watched in amazement. They had never seen anything like it. How do they do this? One observer asked. There is no logic to their movements. An old human sergeant overheard the question and laughed. That's the point, friend. We don't follow logic. We follow instinct. But the strangest thing was not how the humans fought. It was how they treated the enemy. When human medics found wounded Drakath soldiers, they treated them. They gave them medicine. They talked to them. Some of the prisoners were so confused by this kindness that they started sharing information. A few even refused to return to the Dominion when given the chance. A Drakath commander sent a frustrated message to his superiors. This is not warfare. This is chaos. We cannot calculate chaos, Chen replied on an open channel. You're right. This is not warfare by your rules. This is what we call improvisation. Get used to it. The Drakath retreated from Theta Requiem with 40% of their forces dead or captured. It was their first strategic defeat in living memory. News of the victory spread across the galaxy. For the first time in months, Council species felt hope. Maybe the war could be won after all, but the battle that truly changed everything happened at Corvin's Reach. Corvin's Reach was a peaceful world, home to 8 billion Council citizens. The Drakath had no interest in conquering it. They wanted to destroy it. Their scientists had built a terrible weapon, a device that could crack a planet's core and tear the world apart. They planned to use Corvin's Reach as an example. It's a warning to anyone who thought about resisting them. The Council learned about the weapon too late. Their fleets were out of position. There was no time for evacuation. 8 billion lives would be lost unless someone could stop the weapon before it fired. A human special operations team volunteered for the mission. There were only 12 of them. Their commander was a woman named Yuki Tanaka. She was 32 years old, born in a small village in Japan. Trained in the hardest military programs Earth had ever created. When she heard about the mission, she did not hesitate. The odds of success are 3%, the Council tactical computer announced. The odds of survival are effectively 0. Then we better not waste time, Tanaka replied. The team dropped onto Corvin's Reach in the middle of the night. They had to cross 100 kilometers of enemy territory, infiltrate a heavily guarded facility, and disable a weapon they had never seen before. They had 6 hours. The first problem came immediately. Their landing zone was compromised. Drakath patrols found them within minutes. 2 team members died in the first firefight. The remaining 10 pushed forward. They moved through forests and across rivers. They avoided patrols when they could and eliminated them when they could not. Every hour, they lost another team member, but they kept moving. With 2 hours left, only 4 of them remained. They reached the outer perimeter of the facility. The weapon was visible in the distance, a massive structure that pulsed with deadly energy. 3 more died breaching the ... Tanaka went in alone. She fought through corridors filled with Drakath guards. She was shot twice in the leg and once in the shoulder. Her blood left a trail on the floor behind her, but she kept moving. She reached the weapon control room with 15 minutes to spare. Her hands shook as she entered the deactivation codes that Council intelligence had provided. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, then the weapon powered down. 8 billion lives were saved. Tanaka tried to escape, but her legs would not work anymore. The damage was too severe. She crawled instead. For 3 days, she crawled through enemy territory with 2 broken legs and a hole in her shoulder. She crawled 18 kilometers before Council rescue teams found her. When they asked her why she kept going, why she did not just give up and die, her answer was broadcast across the galaxy because someone had to. She survived. She lost both legs and spent a year learning to walk again with artificial replacements. The Council offered her medals and honors. She refused them all. "I was just doing my job," she said. Any human would have done the same. That was the moment the galaxy truly understood what humans were. They were not just good soldiers. They were not just clever tech. They were beings who would crawl through fire to save people they had never met. They were beings who saw sacrifice not as something special, but as something expected. The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years. It was a group of 847 different alien species who had agreed to work together, trade together, and follow the same laws. They had built great cities on 1,000 worlds. They had created technologies that could move ships faster than light. They believed they understood everything about how the universe worked. But there was one rule that every species learned before they learned anything else. It was written in the oldest books. It was taught to children before they could walk. The rule was simple: never contact the humans. Never visit their world. Never under any circumstances bring them into galactic affairs. Earth sat alone in a quiet corner of the galaxy, surrounded by warning beacons that broadcast their message in 17 different languages. The beacons did not say that humans were primitive. They did not say that humans were weak. They simply said, "Stay away. Do not make contact." By order of the founders, Ambassador Kethvorin was a Silithian, and a species known for their glowing skin and their love of knowledge. He had spent 300 years studying the history of the Council, and he had always wondered about the human quarantine. The founders had been wise beings. They did not make rules without reason, so why were they so afraid of one small species? On one small planet, he found his answer in the classified archives, in files that had not been opened for thousands of years. The records spoke of something called the Precursor Wars, a terrible conflict that had happened before the Council existed. During that war, the founders had encountered humans for the first time. What they saw had terrified them. The humans had done things that made no sense. They formed friendships with prisoners they were supposed to hate. They sacrificed their own lives to save species they had only known for a few hours. They learned and changed and adapted faster than any species the founders had ever seen. In the morning, they would fight one way. By evening, they would fight completely differently. They were impossible to predict. It's impossible to control. The founders had won the war, but they never forgot what they saw. They created the quarantine. Not because humans were weak, but because humans were something they could not understand. And what they could not understand, they feared. Kethvorin closed the ancient files with trembling hands. He understood now why the rule existed, but he also knew that the rule was about to be broken. The Drakkith Dominion had come. The Drakkith were a species of warriors. They had 4 arms, thick scales, and eyes that saw in the dark. For centuries, they had stayed in their own corner of the galaxy, fighting among themselves. But something had changed. They had unified under a single leader, and now they wanted more. They wanted everything. In 6 months, they had conquered 6 star systems. Their warships numbered in the millions. Soldiers fought without fear and died without complaint. The Council's defensive forces were falling apart. Every battle ended the same way, with Drakkith victory and Council retreat. High Chancellor Morvith called an emergency meeting. He was a being made of living crystal, beautiful and cold. He had led the Council for 200 years, and he had never known defeat. The idea of losing was something he could not accept. "We need more soldiers," Morvith announced to the assembled representatives. "Our forces are not enough. We need billions more." A murmur ran through the chamber. Where would they find billions of soldiers? Most Council species had small populations. They valued quality over quantity. They did not breed quickly. "There is one option," Morvith continued. His crystalline body glowed with cold light. "The humans." The chamber went silent. Representatives looked at each other with fear in their eyes. "The quarantine exists for a reason," someone said. "The quarantine exists because our ancestors were superstitious," Morvith replied. "They fought a war thousands of years ago and got scared. But we are not them. We are stronger, we are smarter, and we are desperate." Kethvorin rose from his seat. Skin flickered with alarm, shifting through colors of warning. I have read the archives, he said. The founders were not superstitious. They were terrified. They saw something in humans. That made them create the strongest prohibition in our entire legal code. We should not ignore their wisdom. Morvith made a sound like breaking glass. It was how his species laughed. The founders are dust. Their fears died with them. The humans are primitive. They have never left their own planet. They have no warships, no shields, no weapons that could threaten us. They are simply numerous, and we need numbers. What if they refuse to help us? Another representative asked. They will not refuse. Morvith's glow turned harsh and bright. We will give them a choice. They can serve the council, or they can watch their world burn. It is not complicated. The vote was held. Kethvorin voted against the measure. So did a few others who had read the old stories, who remembered the warnings. But fear of the Draketh was stronger than fear of ancient legends. A fleet of 30 warships was sent to Earth. They carried enough firepower to destroy continents. They carried diplomats who had been trained to intimidate and threaten. They carried the absolute certainty that primitive humans would bow to superior power. Kethvorin watched the fleet depart from the observation deck of the council station. His skin had turned a deep blue, the color of grief among his people. "You think this is a mistake?" said a voice beside him. He turned to see Admiral Vexinar, an old soldier who had fought in 100 battles. Her scales were gray with age, and one of her eyes was mechanical, a replacement for one lost in combat. "I think we have just done something we cannot undo," Kethvorin replied. "The founders sealed the humans away for a reason. We are about to find out what that reason was." "Perhaps they are just primitives," Vexinar said. "Perhaps the old stories were exaggerated. Perhaps—" Kethvorin watched the fleet disappear into the darkness between stars. "But I do not think so. I have read the words of the founders. They were not beings who frightened easily. Something about humans scared them so badly that they created a law that has lasted 12,000 years." He turned away from the window. "We have just invited that something into our civilization. I hope, for all our sakes, that I am wrong about what happens next." But deep in his heart, he knew he was not wrong. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Council fleet arrived above Earth on a Tuesday morning. 30 warships arranged themselves in a perfect formation above the blue planet, their weapons charged and ready. The fleet commander, a Draketh defector named Gorvon, looked down at the world below and felt nothing but contempt. The humans had no orbital defenses, no warships, no shield generators. They were exactly what the High Chancellor had said, primitive creatures who had never left their own world. This would be easy. Gorvon activated the communication array and broadcast his message on every frequency the humans used. His words were translated into their many languages and sent to every device on the planet. "People of Earth," he announced. "I am Commander Gorvon of the Galactic Council Fleet. Your world is now under Council authority. You will provide 1 billion soldiers to serve in our military forces. You have 1 solar cycle to comply. If you refuse, we will begin destroying your cities one by one until you agree. This is not a negotiation. This is an order." He ended the transmission and settled back to wait. He expected panic, expected chaos, expected desperate messages begging for mercy. What he got was silence. For 6 hours, the humans said nothing. Gorvon watched his sensors with growing confusion. Down on the planet, something strange was happening. The humans were talking to each other, but not in the way he expected. They were not screaming or running or fighting among themselves. They were organizing. Nations that had been enemies for centuries were suddenly cooperating. Resources were being shared across borders. Military forces were combining. Political leaders who had refused to speak to each other for generations were now sitting in the same rooms, working together. In 6 hours, the fractured nations of Earth did something they had never done before. They unified. When the response finally came, it was not what Gorvon expected. "Council Fleet, this is United Earth Command. We have received your demands. We are prepared to provide soldiers for your war. However, we have conditions. A diplomatic team is being sent to your flagship to discuss terms. Please prepare to receive them." Gorvon stared at the message in disbelief. conditions, diplomacy. These primitives were supposed to be terrified. Instead, they were acting like equals. He reported the situation to High Chancellor Morveth. The Chancellor found it amusing. "Let them come," Morveth said. "Let them see our power up close. Once they understand what they face, they will abandon their foolish conditions." A small shuttle rose from the planet below. It docked with Gorvin's flagship, and 12 humans walked out. They wore simple clothing and carried no weapons. Their leader was a woman named Alina Vasquez. She was not tall. She was not physically impressive. She had dark hair turning gray and lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often. She walked into the command center of the flagship as if she owned it. Gorvan towered over her. His forearms crossed over his chest. His scales reflected the harsh lighting of the ship. He had killed hundreds of enemies in combat. He had led armies. He had conquered worlds. Council soldiers began requesting human commanders. They wanted to learn how to fight like humans. More importantly, they wanted to learn how to believe like humans, how to have that unshakable faith that impossible things could be done if you were willing to pay the price. The Draketh Dominion sent a request for peace talks. They had calculated every variable in the war. They had accounted for every weapon, every strategy, every possible outcome. But they had not accounted for the one thing that made humans different. They had not accounted for hope. The war ended on a quiet morning. The Draketh Dominion signed the surrender documents and agreed to withdraw from all conquered territories. Their great fleets retreated to their home systems. Their warriors put down their weapons. The galaxy was at peace. It should have been a time of celebration. Instead, High Chancellor Morveth called an emergency meeting. The topic was not the defeated enemy. The topic was the allies who had won the war. The topic was humanity. "We have made a terrible mistake," Morveth announced to the closed session. Only the highest-ranking council members were present. No humans were invited. We brought them in to fight our war, and they did. But now they will not leave. He projected images onto the chamber walls. Human soldiers training with council troops, human merchants opening shops on alien worlds, human teachers working in alien schools, human doctors treating alien patients. In just 2 years, humans had spread across the galaxy like water spreading through sand. "They have integrated too deeply," Morveth continued. "They are everywhere. Our military relies on their tactics. Our economy relies on their trade. Our people have started adopting their customs. They are changing everything." An elderly representative from the Vorthian collective raised her hand. "Is change necessarily bad? The humans helped us win the war. Perhaps their influence is positive?" "Positive." Morveth's crystalline body pulsed with anger. "Look at what is happening. The Kalathi have abandoned their caste system. A system that maintained order for 10,000 years, gone in 2 years. The mechanists have started giving their workers something called weekends. The Silithians are debating democracy. Democracy. A system of chaos and disorder." He turned to face the full chamber. "The humans have not conquered us with weapons. They have conquered us with ideas. With stories, with their strange belief that everyone deserves a voice. If we do not act now, there will be nothing left of our civilization." Ambassador Kethvorin listened in silence. He had spent 2 years working alongside humans. He had learned their languages, eaten their food, listened to their music. He had watched them laugh at their own failures and celebrate the successes of others. He understood them better than anyone else in the chamber, and he knew that Morveth was both right and wrong. The humans were changing the galaxy. That was true. But Morveth saw this as a threat. Kethvorin saw it as something else entirely. A Draketh observer spoke next. The Draketh had been defeated in the war, but they had been given a seat on the council as part of the peace agreement. This observer had spent time studying humans during the conflict. "They are not conquering us with weapons," he said. "They are conquering us with cookouts." Confused murmurs filled the chamber. "It is a human tradition," the Draketh explained. "They gather together, cook food over fire, and share it with others. Strangers become friends. Enemies become allies. I attended one of these cookouts. I ate burned meat and drank a strange brown liquid they called cola. By the end of the evening, I had told them stories about my family. They had told me stories about theirs. I did not realize until later that I no longer saw them as enemies. He looked around the chamber. That is their weapon. They make you care about them. They make you feel like you belong with them. And once you feel that, you cannot hate them anymore. Morvith dismissed this with a wave of his crystalline hand. Sentiment. Weakness. We must act before they spread further. A vote was held. The proposal was simple. Humanity would be returned to quarantine. Their soldiers would be sent home with honors. Their diplomats would be expelled. The warning beacons around Earth would be restored, stronger than before. The vote passed. But they had forgotten one thing. The humans always learned faster than anyone expected. When Ambassador Elena Vasquez entered the chamber an hour later, Ace was smiling. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. "We know what you decided," she said. "We've known for 6 hours." Morvith's glow flickered. "How? Because we listened. Because we watched. Because that is what we do." She walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. "You voted to send us home. To lock us away behind warning beacons. To pretend the last 2 years never happened. You have no choice," Morvith said. "Our fleets are restored. We no longer need you." "You're right. You don't need our soldiers anymore." Lena stopped walking. "But here's what you didn't consider." She pressed a button on her wrist device. The chamber walls lit up with thousands of images. Humans teaching classes on Corvon's Reach. Humans working in hospitals on Silithian Prime. Humans building houses alongside Vorthian families. Humans holding the children of species that had once been strangers. In 2 years, we didn't just fight your war. We built relationships. We made friends. We fell in love. We married into your families. We became part of your communities." She gestured at the images. "You can try to remove us. But you would be removing doctors from hospitals in the middle of treatment. Teachers from schools in the middle of lessons. Workers from projects in the middle of construction. Parents from children who love them." Her voice hardened.
Ow.
"So, here's our counteroffer. We stay, not as visitors, not as soldiers, as partners, as neighbors, as family. And in 50 years, you won't remember why you were ever afraid of us." The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted at each other. Some demanded that the humans be expelled immediately. Others questioned whether expulsion was even possible anymore. But Kethforn noticed something else. He looked up at the observation galleries where ordinary citizens from 100 different species had gathered to watch. They were not shouting. They were applauding. They were applauding for the humans. Because in 2 years, the humans had not just changed the council. They had changed the people. They had shown them a different way of thinking. A different way of living. A way that valued connection over control. Friendship over fear. The vote to expel humanity was never implemented. Morvith tried to force the issue out, but he found that his support had vanished. Representatives who had voted for expulsion suddenly changed their minds. Military commanders refused to follow orders. Citizens protested in the streets. Within a month, Morvith was removed from power. The council began a long, difficult process of restructuring. Itself, the humans stayed. They stayed, and they built, and they loved, and they changed. Everything in the galaxy would never be the same. 50 years passed like a dream. The warning. Beacons around Earth were taken down and rebuilt as a monument. They no longer broadcast messages of fear and isolation. Instead, they stood as a reminder of how much had changed, and how quickly the impossible could become ordinary. Ambassador Kethforan attended the dedication ceremony. He was old now, his bioluminescent skin dimmer than it had once been, his movements slower. But his mind was still sharp, and his memories were still clear. He remembered the day the council voted to bring humans into the war. He remembered the fear in the chamber. He remembered believing that the galaxy was about to make a terrible mistake. He had been right, but not in the way he expected. Standing beside him was Sofia Vasquez, the granddaughter of Elena. She had inherited her grandmother's dark hair and her grandmother's smile. She served as humanity's representative on the council, a position that had once seemed impossible. "It's strange to think about," Sophia said, looking up at the monument. 50 years ago, these beacons told the galaxy to stay away from us. Now they're a tourist attraction. Cathvorin made a sound that was the Silithian equivalent of a chuckle. Many strange things have happened in 50 years. This is perhaps the least strange. He was not exaggerating. The galaxy had transformed in ways that the founders of the council would never have imagined. The rigid laws that had governed council society for 12,000 years had been replaced by something messier and stranger. Humans called it democracy. Other species had other names for it. Whatever the name, the principle was the same. Every voice mattered. Every opinion counted. Decisions were made not by a single authority, but by the collective will of billions. It was inefficient. It was chaotic. Arguments lasted for months. Agreements were endlessly revised. Nothing was ever simple. It was also beautiful, because for the first time in galactic history, ordinary people had power. Workers could demand better conditions. Citizens could change their governments. Ideas could rise from the bottom instead of being imposed from the top. The galaxy was noisier than it had ever been, filled with debates and disagreements and passionate arguments about what the future should look like. And through it all, the humans kept doing what they had always done. They made friends. They built communities. They saw strangers and saw potential family members. They looked at walls and saw doors. Interspecies families were common now. On any planet in the galaxy, you could find children who had parents from different worlds. They grew up speaking multiple languages, eating food from multiple cultures, seeing themselves as citizens of the galaxy rather than subjects of a single world. Human art hung in alien galleries. Alien music played in human homes. Philosophers from 100 species debated the meaning of existence in universities that taught students from 1,000 worlds. The boundaries that had once seemed so important had become almost invisible. Even the Dracoth had changed. The species that had once been conquerors now served as the galaxy's most dedicated protectors of endangered life. Their warriors, who had once destroyed worlds, now fought to save dying species from extinction. They approached conservation with the same intensity they had once applied to war. When asked about this transformation, a Dracoth elder had explained it simply: "The humans taught us that strength is not about what you can destroy. It is about what you can protect." Cathvorin stepped forward to address the crowd gathered at the monument. Beings from across the galaxy had come to celebrate not a victory, but a becoming. They stood together, scaled and furred and crystalline and soft-skinned, united in a way that would have seemed like fantasy 50 years ago. 50 years ago, Cathvorin began, we were warned not to involve humans. We were told they were unpredictable, dangerous, impossible to control. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the sea of faces. The warnings were correct. Humans are impossible to control. Uncertain laughter rippled through the crowd, but we were wrong about what that meant. Cathvorin's glow brightened, colors shifting through the spectrum of his emotions. We thought control was strength. We thought predictability was safety. We thought the universe was a problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced. He gestured at the monument, at the crowd, at the galaxy above them. The humans taught us differently. They taught us that adaptation is strength, that empathy is safety, that the universe is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be written together. He turned to look at the last warning beacon, preserved in crystal, its message forever silenced. We were warned not to involve humans. We ignored the warning. His voice carried across the gathering. Across the broadcast networks that sent his words to every corner of the galaxy, it was the best mistake we ever made. The crowd erupted in applause. Beings who had once been strangers embraced each other. Children laughed and played, their voices mixing together in languages their grandparents had never heard. Sophia, Askas found Kethvorin after the ceremony. They walked together through the gardens surrounding the monument, past flowers from 100 worlds that grew side by side in soil that had been carefully blended to support them all. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" she asked. "If the council had listened to the warnings, if they had left us alone?" Kethvorin considered the question. "Sometimes. I think we would have won the war eventually, without your help. But we would have remained the same. Rigid, fearful, divided." He stopped walking and looked up at the stars. "Your species has a saying. I learned it from your grandmother. A stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. We did not understand this. We saw strangers as threats. We built walls and beacons to keep them away." He turned to face Sophia. "Humans see the universe differently. You see connections where we saw boundaries. You see possibilities where we saw dangers. You looked at a galaxy full of strangers and decided to make them all your friends." Sophia smiled. It was her grandmother's smile, full of warmth and stubborn hope. "That's just how we are," she said. "We can't help it." "No," Kethvorin agreed. "You cannot. And that is exactly why the founders were afraid of you. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were contagious. Your way of seeing the world, your way of treating others, it spreads. It changes everything it touches." He looked back at the monument, at the crowds still celebrating, at the future that had been built from a single terrifying decision. They were right to be afraid, and they were right to try to keep you contained. But they were wrong about one thing. What's that? Kethvorin's skin glowed with colors that meant joy and gratitude and hope. "They thought we needed to be protected from you. But the truth is, you were exactly what we needed. We just didn't know it yet." They stood together in the garden, two beings from different worlds, surrounded by the miracle that had grown from one simple truth, that the universe was better when no one had to face it alone. Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that had learned at last how to be a family.